Hey everyone, it's Sean, and in this video tutorial, I'm going to be showing you guys all about color guides in Adobe Illustrator, why they're useful, and how you can use them to create really awesome gradients within your work. So let's just jump right in. In Illustrator, I'm going to click Create New, and I'm going to create a new document. I'm going to make sure it's 6 inches by 4 inches. I'd like to use an RGB color space. And if you guys switch over to an RGB color space and you get a little warning sign right here, what we can do is click on More Settings, and you can change your profile from maybe print to web and just reset these settings to be 4 by 6 inches and RGB color space. It just might be because your previous project was being done in CMYK and Illustrator's being a little bit finicky. But once you get everything set up, we can hit create, and we're in our new document. So color guides, which I have up right here, can be found in your little side panel menu. If they're not there, you can go to Window and Color Guide, and it'll just make sure that it's there. But to properly use it, we need to first have a shape drawn out. So I'm going to draw out a rectangle that just has a fill and no stroke. And I'm going to make sure it's the size of my artboard. Cool. There we go. And I want to fill it with a really vibrant color. So I'm going to use a blue, make sure it's really saturated, just pull it all the way over to the right hand side of the spectrum there. And probably somewhere in there looks nice. Yeah, I like that blue. You guys can choose whichever color you'd like to work with. I'm just going here. So when we go to our color guide, depending on which harmony rule you guys have selected, I had complementary already selected, but you can see in here there's tons of different harmony rules. Some of these you might recognize from your art classes within elementary school and high school, but that's just sort of a recap. Complementary, obviously, if you think in terms of the color spectrum, they are colors that are at opposite ends of the wheel from one another. You have left complement, right complement. Analogous, which is really similar to monochromatic, but not quite the same. You can see here's monochromatic down here. We have triad, 1, 2, 3, and tetrads. We have pentagrams, all sorts of stuff. For now, though, what I'd like to do is I'm actually going to change this blue tone one more time. I think I want it to be a little bit more purpley, maybe a little bit lighter. Let's keep going closer towards the purples, maybe something in there. And you can see that our colors auto sort of update in a really cool way in the color guide. So there's a couple different things that we can do here. And if you click on your main color, you can see that there is an active color arrow right above it. If you click on your main color and then you hold shift click, you'll have both color swatches selected at the same time. And what we can do is we can actually save this color group into our swatches panel. So if we click that and then we jump over to our swatches panel, you'll see down here that it has created a new color group. And just to keep things from getting super confusing, I'm actually going to delete a few of these color swatches, because we're going to be loading in tons of colors here in a second. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm set back to this blue color. I can come back to my color guide palette, and I've switched from complementary down to what sort of looks like the pentagram feature, maybe something like that, which is kind of where I'd like to go next. So I'm going to click on the pentagram color guide, and now you can see we have tons of different sort of colors to choose from. I also just realized if you guys weren't seeing any of that and all you were seeing was this, you can click on show options and boom, you'll get all of these tints and shades visible to you. You can also click on show tints and shades, and it should actually increase what you can and cannot see here. The other thing that is really useful to have is color guide options. Under color guide options, you can see how many steps it wants to be able to show you. Usually 4 or 5 is more than enough. And you can also get different variations. So if we look at 0, we're just getting the active tints and shades across the board. And if we go up to 50, we're getting not so much black as we are dark, and not so much white as we are sort of lighter and desaturated. If we keep this at 100, you'll get a much more accurate representation of this full spectrum. So these are the settings that I like to leave mine on, but it's totally up to you what you want to do. I'm just going to hit OK. And now what we can do is click on blue and shift click down to this green teal color or this green seafoam color to select all of these. And we can go under edit or apply colors, and this recolor artwork window should pop up. And what we can do is click on edit and it will show us the color wheel. Okay. And so one sort of drawback to the pentagram color scheme here is that there's no actual complementary color to this blue that we have selected. It should be up there, but it's not. That's why we added the complementary color scheme to our color swatches first. And what we can do in here actually is you can do a few different things. You can fully rotate and change which colors are being selected in here. I'm just going to close this to make sure that I don't apply those changes. That's sort of the one frustrating thing about this window is you can't undo any of the changes that you make. So you just want to make sure you're making changes pretty judiciously and responsibly and not going super crazy. But what I would like to do is I'd like to unlink all of these colors, and I just want to sort of bring in my tints and shades a little bit more closer to the main blue tone. I almost want to sort of evenly distribute these. So you can sort of see we're making straight lines of complementary colors from one color to the next. There we go. And we can just pretend that we have the complementary color on the other side of this. The reason why I want all these different complementary colors is because if I wanted to make a smooth gradient from this blue over to this green, I need this aqua color here in the middle in order to properly provide that sort of gap stop color. And same with from blue to red, I need this sort of like pinkish color, purplish color, magenta in the middle in order to provide that smooth transition. And same if I wanted to get from blue to yellow. I would either need these two blues and greens or these two reds and magentas in order to get to my yellow color. So what we can do is we can hit OK. We can select all of this row and we can hit add to new color group swatch. And now we have a new color group swatch. What I can do is I can click these 4 color groups or color swatches. I can bring them up into my new book or into my new group, and I can just delete the original one. Gonna hit yes. And now we have a wonderful set of complementary colors that we can combine into all sorts of different gradients. So what I'm going to do is with my rectangle selected, down here we have the option to apply a color fill, a gradient fill, or no fill. I'm going to select gradient fill. This should have opened up the gradient menu for you, and if it didn't, no big deal. It's pretty easy to find. We can just go up to Window, Gradient, and it's sitting right there. If your gradient window looked like this, very simplistic, you can just click on Show Options, and it will show you a bunch of different options. The next thing you want to sort of take into consideration is the type of gradient you're creating. In Illustrator, we can create a linear gradient, a radial gradient, or a freeform gradient. For now, we're just going to be looking at these two. Freeform gradients sort of allow you to have a little bit more control because you can create anchor points on your gradient sort of shape and better play around and get different colors of gradients. But as you can see, it's kind of stalling out my computer. So here is our 4 anchor points that you can sort of play around with in the freeform gradient tool. I'll let you guys play around with that on your own, but for now, I'm just going to switch this back to linear. With linear, you have the choice to decide what angle your gradient sits on. You can increase this and decrease this to change the angle. I'm going to set it back down to 0. With radial, you have the option of angle again, but because radial gradients create perfect circles, you won't notice an actual change in the angle itself when you have this aspect ratio set to 100%. If we change the aspect ratio from 100% to something a little bit more oval, so half 50% of a ratio, then we can come up here to angle and you can see the difference in angle that it's actually making. Cool. So I'm just going to set this back up to 100 and we're good to go. So with the linear gradient tool selected and we have our gradient here, you now have your gradient slider And this is where you work with all of your colors to create nice looking gradients. If you double click on the color swatch here, another window will open up, and this is kind of where gradients get a little bit frustrating. If you don't have swatches set up, every time you create a new gradient swatch, you have to click on this hamburger menu and choose which color space to be working within. Then you can go ahead and adjust any colors that you want to make and start making nicer looking gradients. Because we went to the trouble of setting up our swatches panel, it's actually going to be pretty easy for us. We just have to click on this swatches button. It opens up our swatches library, and we can start adding to our gradients. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a 2-color gradient right now, and you can see how quick and easy that was, right? The other cool thing that we can do within our gradients is if you have your object selected and it's filled with a gradient, you can press the G key and it will bring up this slider again. It will bring up your window again, and you can actually click and drag out to have better control over your gradient itself. And you can see that this slider is very similar to our slider over here. You can click and drag on specific color swatches to adjust how far across the slider they take effect. You can click and drag on our midpoint slider here to adjust how big the transition is, or how abrupt and specific it is to a specific section of our gradient, and vice versa on this side with the other color. The other thing that you get access to is on the left-hand side of the slider, you can adjust the placement of our gradient, right? And on the right-hand side, you can adjust the, sorry, let me just grab it. You can adjust the length of our gradient, right? So by dragging it closer, it gets shorter. By dragging it out to the right, it gets further or larger, longer, further away, whatever you want to say. And finally, we can actually control the rotation of our gradient, right? So the gradient tool can be quite a powerful slider to sort of play around with if you find it visually easier to deal with it like this than you do over in this window. Cool. So let's pretend we wanted to have a 3-color gradient and we wanted it to be dark blue to teal to dark blue again. You could easily click on the other side of the spectrum and double click and create a dark blue color swatch once again, and then you get sort of a cool reflective sort of thing going on here. Or I'm just going to Command Z a few times and get back to when we only had 2 color swatches. There we go. The other thing you can do is you can press Alt Option and click and drag out from a different color swatch to duplicate that color swatch and place it somewhere else on your gradient bar here. So that's just a couple of ways to go about doing it. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to bring this back out to the other side of the spectrum, and we can start looking at applying gradients that need to transition between one another. To do that, I'm just going to place 2 more gradient swatches in here, and we're going to start playing around with their sort of color settings. So if I want to get from blue to, let's say, yellow on this end, I'm going to set that to yellow. We need to make sure we're applying colors in the right order to get there. So from blue to yellow, we had to go to teal and then to green. And you can use these sort of transition sliders to affect the how long the transition is between each color. And you can sort of just play around with this and get the best sort of transition possible that it is you're looking for. And you can see now we have a nice color transition from our one color to its complementary color across the spectrum. If we wanted to do this a little bit differently and we wanted to go from blue to yellow on the other side of the color wheel, we just have to make sure our gradient is selected. Make sure our gradient is selected and come in and apply the other colors from the other side of the wheel. And we have a much more, what I think is probably a little bit more pleasing of a color palette, but that's just me. So you can see how from working within, let me just come back to my swatches, grab this one, go into our color book. You can see how working within our swatches here, we used a mathematical approach to create color swatches in a color group to create really vibrant and strong gradients that are going to be very versatile and usable within our artwork, as opposed to just guessing at which colors work best and not really creating a very strong gradient. The last thing that I want to do before we jet off is I'd like to add in a few more color swatches to our swatches panel. And I'm going to come up to color guide and I'm going to select monochromatic, and I want to select this entire active row. And if you wanted to select multiple columns at once, you can click and then shift click down and you can get more of the tints and shades that encompass that entire section. What I'd like to do is grab some of the super light ones but leave some of the saturated ones out, and to do that you can hit command click and deselect which ones you don't need. Okay, or you can just press shift and add in a couple of extras if you'd like. I'm going to add that to our swatches library, and now we have a nice amount of monochromatic shades that we can choose from. So that's it for this video. In the next video, I'll show you how to sort of create really subtle gradients that you can use to just create some really abstract and interesting artwork with. I'll catch you in the next video.